So, imagine trying to cage a god. And, not a metaphorical deity, not some psychic reflection born of the collective belief of mortal minds.
Right, exactly.
We are talking about trying to trap a fundamental law of physics made flesh, a cosmic entity that, in its natural state, literally feeds on the dying light of stars.
Which begs the question, what kind of cage do you build for gravity? For time?
I mean, iron melts, energy shields shatter. The only way to trap a creature of absolute immutable physical reality is to build a cage out of pure unreality.
And tragically, to lubricate the hinges of that cage with the blood of 10,000 men.
Presentation on information extracted from the Separata Sector manuscripts, Planet Baldar section report, and can only be accessed by the Historicus Perfectus. I am Historiator Recensitas. Alongside Historiator Ophelia Praxane, we operate within the Logos Historica Verita, Department of Historical Recovery.
Acknowledged and verified. The archival seals are fractured, the data stream is flowing, though its contents remain profoundly volatile.
Very volatile.
You, listening to this presentation, must understand that we are operating entirely outside the boundaries of standard imperial doctrinal review today.
Yeah, the air in this vault smells of ozone and oxidized copper for a reason. This is not some sanitized account of an Astra Militarum victory.
Not at all. We are dissecting a collision of ancient cosmic inevitability and a brand of human fanaticism so deeply corrupted that it loops back around into a twisted, terrifying form of loyalty.
So let us establish a brief perimeter of context before we descend into the primary manuscript. It's a mere fraction of our total focus today, but it is absolutely essential to understand the stage upon which this nightmare unfolds.
Yeah.
We look to the fringes of the galaxy, to the Separata sector. For 300 years, this sector was an isolated island, entirely cut off from the wider galaxy by the violent purple storms of the Cicatrix Maledictum.
3 centuries of absolute isolation.
Yeah. And during that time, they survived through sheer indomitable will, fighting off localized threats and effectively pacifying their isolated bubble under borderline heretical leadership.
They really believed they had weathered the worst of the cosmic storm. But recently, a stable rift opened, reconnecting them to the wider galaxy.
And that influx of psychic energy from the rift acted as a catalyst.
Exactly. It acted as an alarm clock for the mining planet of Baldar.
Right, Baldar. It was a noisy industrial rock where the sounds of hydraulic picks masked a secret buried deep beneath the crust.
A massive secret.
That psychic shockwave from the new passage shattered the stasis protocols of a subterranean world known as Keshnatar. And with it, it awoke Ferron Dumac.
A Necron overlord who had slumbered there since the War in Heaven millions of years ago.
Yeah. Dumac is a biotechnological strategist who views organic life not as a threat, but as raw, inefficient material waiting to be processed.
Like he just woke up and went straight to work.
Yeah.
Upon waking, he simply broadcast a mine shackle frequency.
Which is horrifying.
Within days, 10,000 human miners were marching in perfect, silent unison into the maw of his catacombs to serve as biological components for his Tomb World's reconstruction.
All while the Astra Militarum regiments on the surface were just systematically butchered.
But, the tragedy of Baldar isn't the awakening of an ancient alien empire, nor is it the slaughter on the surface. That is merely the distraction.
Wait, a planetary invasion is the distraction?
Yes. While Ferron Dumac looked up at the surface, believing he was the apex predator reclaiming his garden from insects, a terrifying, fanatical strike force broke into his deepest, most sacred vault.
So our mission today for this deep dive is to analyze the catastrophic subterranean clash. We are going to dissect the mechanics of the moment where absolute warp-fueled fanaticism collided with the cold, immortal logic of living metal.
And ultimately, understand the horrifying price paid to capture a god.
Right. We are leaving the surface of Baldar behind. We are descending directly into the oppressive, dark depths of the tomb world of Keshnatar.
The environmental data from this deep crust descent describes an atmosphere cold enough to microfracture ceramite armor.
I mean, just the ambient lighting is a sickly, dooming emerald green that doesn't so much illuminate the architecture as it does cast aggressive, impossible shadows.
It sits a deeply paranoid scene. And standing before the final massive gate of the central stasis chamber is Hochmeister Konrad von Bassenheim.
Conrad is the supreme leader of a renegade space marine chapter known as the Order of Mercy of Iron.
And he has not come to this gate quietly. He hasn't used stealth or misdirection.
No, he's carved a path of unimaginable, sustained butchery through the upper levels of the catacombs just to reach this exact threshold.
Let's examine the anatomy of how he breaches this final barrier, because it frankly challenges our understanding of conventional warfare.
This barricade isn't just a thick slab of ancient metal, right?
No, not at all. It is a fusion of Necron technological supremacy, subatomic bonding, regenerative living metal, and, to put it in the only terms that fit, profane magic.
The Strike Force applies something called a scrap code to force entry.
The scrap code is fascinating because it defies conventional logic. To call it a computer virus is to totally misunderstand its fundamental nature.
Right, it's a technological virus, certainly, but it is forged in the dark fires of the warp.
It is not merely a malicious program designed to override security gates. It is a spiritual sickness inflicted upon machinery. It literally introduces the concept of suffering to a binary system.
I mean, think about the implications of that. The Necron Gate operates on pure, flawless mathematics. It expects ones and zeros. It expects physical certainty.
But what happens when you inject a sentient, hateful logic worm into that system?
Imagine a modern, highly sophisticated digital virus designed to shut down a planetary power grid and then fuse that digital code with a literal demonic curse.
The result is visceral. When they apply this scrap code, the colossal metal barrier actually screams.
It screams.
Yes. The metal twists, contorts, and shrieks in agony before shattering. They don't just hack the door, they torture it to death.
Wow. That physical reaction is the crux of the matter. The Necrons possess technology so advanced it appears indistinguishable from magic, but it relies entirely on the cold, rational, physical laws of the universe.
And the warp is the absolute antithesis of that. It is the realm of emotion, of paradox, of impossibility.
So by injecting warp-forged code into living metal, the Strike Force fundamentally violates the physical reality of the gate.
Exactly. The metal screams because its processors are being forced to comprehend an eighth-dimensional paradox. It is experiencing the agonizing impossibility of its own existence.
It breaks because the math of the universe tells it to break.
Which raises an incredibly important question about resource allocation and tactical intent.
Yeah, like why? Why would a Strike Force, especially one as lethal and focused as a renegade Space Marine chapter, bypass an entire planetary war on the surface?
They completely ignored the Imperial Guard. They ignored the tactical dominance of the planet itself.
They marched straight down into the pitch-black abyss, taking heavy casualties, just to break into a single, highly fortified vault. What could possibly justify this level of surgical, heretical effort?
The prize resting beyond that shattered gate justifies every drop of blood they spilled to reach it. It is the Cetan shard of the Void Dragon.
A Cetan shard. Even saying the term alone carries an apocalyptic weight.
It does. It is the apex of material power. The Cetan, or star gods, are beings of pure, fundamental physical energy. They are as old as the universe itself.
These are entities that originally fed on the ambient energy of stars and later cultivated an appetite for the life force of sentient beings.
Millions of years ago, during the War in Heaven, the Necrons managed to shatter these gods into fragments and imprison them within hyperspatial tesseract labyrinths.
And the entity resting in the center of this titanic chamber is one of those fragments?
Yes, resting in its pure immaterial state. It is the ultimate power source, the infinite battery that has been feeding and restoring this entire dormant world for eons.
And the Order of Mercy of Iron intends to steal it. To understand why they would attempt something so insanely dangerous, we need to briefly examine their ideological architecture.
Who are these invaders?
Exactly. Originally, they were known as the Teutonic Blades, a strictly loyalist chapter, but they were condemned to the Abyssal Crusade.
Which was a catastrophic, penitent campaign cast directly into the eye of terror. They were supposed to die seeking absolution.
Instead, they thrived. They fought continuously in a realm of absolute madness.
But over centuries of surviving the worst the galaxy had to offer and feeling utterly abandoned by a decaying bureaucratic imperium, their loyalty twisted into something entirely unrecognizable.
They underwent a profound ideological mutation. They became radical resurrectionists.
They surveyed the stagnant nightmare of the Imperium and concluded that the Emperor of Mankind is a god in captivity.
In their twisted theology, the Golden Throne on Terra isn't a life support mechanism. They view it as an instrument of torture.
They believe it is an arcane anchor preventing the Emperor's soul from being reborn in the warp as the Star Child.
So their ultimate grand mission is to launch a bloody pilgrimage to Terra, annihilate the Golden Throne, and assassinate the Emperor.
Not to destroy the Imperium, but to save it. They want to kill him to free his soul.
It is a terrifyingly coherent, self-contained delusion, and to achieve this impossible logistical feat, they made a pact with the chaos god of blood and war.
Though, they do not view themselves as traditional chaos worshippers. In their minds, they are merely using the tools of supreme violence to achieve a holy mission.
And as Conrad stands before this Cetan shard, he sees the missing piece of his puzzle. With a battery of infinite power, his crusade to Terra shifts from a madman's dream to a devastating inevitability.
You can feel the sheer fanatical adrenaline in the historical reconstruction of this moment. As the vault is breached, Conrad's elite honor guard, the Chosen, and his hordes of chaotic cultists surge forward.
Conrad smiles a predatory smile beneath his scarred helm. He broadcasts to his warriors, "Here is our prize! Destroy these pathetic creatures to claim it and have infinite power."
And the horde responds with a battle cry that perfectly encapsulates their madness as they charge.
Death to the prison, life to the god.
Death to the prison, life to the god. It's a chilling summation of their entire philosophy.
But they are not charging into an empty room. The vault is open, the prize is in sight, but the silent guardians of the Tomb World are fully awake.
Unlike the dormant sentries in the upper corridors, the metallic legions in this central chamber have detected the profane breach. The Stasis Chamber's supreme defensive protocols are active.
The guardians are ready to defend their captive god.
We are about to analyze the collision of two fundamentally incompatible methods of warfare. We are watching the unstoppable force of chaotic, warp-fueled fury strike the absolute, immovable object of Necron engineering.
The opening volley is an exercise in sheer, unadulterated physical trauma. The renegade space marines advance with supernatural speed, their bolters roaring.
But the Necron immortals, the heavy infantry of the tomb, react with a chilling, synchronized precision. They don't panic. They don't break formation.
Led by a Necron overlord, they immediately calculate the optimal threat matrix and focus their fire on the heaviest assets in the Chaos lines, the massed obliterators.
The tactical execution here is flawless. Let us break down the physics of what the Overlord does in this opening second. He does not simply point and shoot a conventional firearm.
Right. He utilizes a wrist-mounted device known as a Tachyon arrow.
This is a piece of technology that weaponizes fundamental kinetic energy on a terrifying scale. It accelerates a sliver of heavy metal to faster than light speeds.
Faster than light, within the confines of a subterranean vault.
Precisely. It doesn't rely on chemical explosives or plasma containment. It simply deletes whatever is in its path through pure, incomprehensible physical force.
It translates mass into infinite kinetic trauma.
And the telemetry records this Tachyon arrow striking one of the hulking obliterators.
Now, obliterators are not small targets. They are massive, swollen fusions of corrupted space marine biology, demonic energy, and heavy weaponry. They are literal walking fortresses of flesh and guns.
And the Tachyon arrow hits it with a blinding flash of light, and the chaos monstrosity is instantly vaporized.
It doesn't explode into gore. It is simply erased from the material plane.
But observe the counter-reaction. The chaos forces do not break rank at the sight of this supreme physical deletion.
A Locust destroyer, a hovering Necron heavy weapons platform, attempts to follow up and finish off a second, already damaged obliterator.
It fails to secure the kill, and the grotesque retaliation from that surviving obliterator stands in perfect, horrifying contrast to the sterile, clean destruction of the Tachyon arrow.
The obliterator strikes back with absolute hatred. It uses its flesh metal guns. Let's really consider what flesh metal is for a second.
Awful. It's not a rifle you hold in your hands?
No, it's a weapon that biologically extrudes itself from the mutant's own anatomical structure. It shifts, reforms, and grows based on the demon's will.
It fires a blast of corrupt plasma that melts the Locust destroyer into a puddle of bubbling slag. It is messy, visceral, hateful violence, responding to cold, calculated execution.
That singular exchange perfectly encapsulates the dichotomy of the two forces. The Necrons rely on the supreme mastery of the physical universe, light, kinetic energy, molecular disruption.
While the Order relies on the profane, the mutated, the hateful, unreasoning power of the warp.
But looking at the casualty telemetry here, I have to push back on the tactical reality of Hochmeister Conrad's command decisions.
Oh, absolutely.
A standard tactician would look at this advance and call it a catastrophic failure of force multiplication. Conrad is throwing endless waves of mortal cultists directly into precision alien fire.
These cultists are firing wildly, providing a dense screen of completely inaccurate suppression, and they are being systematically cut down.
They are dying by the hundreds just to gain inches of ground. I mean, is this a tactical assault or is this just a meat grinder?
It is entirely a meat grinder, but, you are applying conventional military logic to an occult science. From Conrad's perspective, this is the flawless tactical application of those assets.
Because of the logistical doctrine of his chapter.
Right. They do not view cultists as soldiers. Cultists are biomass. They're living ammunition. In their doctrine, the first phase of any assault is designated the bleeding.
The bleeding?
Yes. The cultists are launched forward not to win firefights, but to force the enemy to expend energy and, crucially, to cover the battlefield in blood.
So every cultist that dies choking on their own blood from a Gauss flare blast is executing their exact intended purpose.
And what a horrific purpose it is. Because even as the cultists manage to drag down a few Necron immortals through the sheer suffocating volume of their inaccurate fire, the battlefield introduces a new layer of ontological terror.
The air is thick with the sharp smell of ozone from the alien weapons and the overwhelming coppery stench of spilled blood.
And through that haze, the Chaos Forces witness the mechanics of regeneration.
Necrodermis. Living metal.
The sensory data describes the enervating, deeply unnerving sight of the Necron immortals, who had just been blown apart by mass bolter fire, slowly beginning to knit themselves back together.
Pieces of metal behaving like intelligent liquid, flowing across the cavern floor to reconnect severed limbs and rebuild blasted torsos.
Imagine the psychological toll of that reality. You pour hundreds of human lives into dropping a single enemy soldier. You expend massive amounts of ammunition.
And as you step over his mechanical remains, the metal flows back together, the glow returns to his eyes, and he stands back up, weapon raised, entirely unbothered by his own temporary death.
It's not just healing. It's a localized rewind of entropy. It is the universe rejecting the fact that you killed him.
For any standard fighting force, that realization would induce immediate panic and a catastrophic rout. The human mind is not built to process an enemy that ignores the finality of death.
But the strike force is fueled by the madness of their chaotic pact and their twisted holy mission. The sight of the regenerating enemy doesn't cause them to break.
It causes them to escalate their violence.
Escalation doesn't even begin to cover it. The heavy hitters enter the fray. The Chaos Hellbrute, a tortured, insane dreadnought housing a mutilated space marine, charges forward.
Its multi-melta vaporizes a Canoptech Wraith, reducing its phasing form to slag. Conrad and his elite honor guard tear apart another Wraith in vicious, close-quarters melee combat.
But the Necrons possess counter-escalation protocols. A plasmancer glides into the chamber.
This is not a soldier. It is a master of elemental destruction.
It does not use standard munitions. It wields the raw energy of the cosmos itself. It invokes what the reports call living lightning from his plasmic lance.
It unleashes a devastating, directed electrical storm, brutally electrocuting two of Chaos's elite chosen warriors right beside Conrad.
It bypasses their physical armor entirely, boiling them alive inside their own ceramite shells.
The battlefield is rapidly descending into total anarchy. The Hellbrute is absorbing heavy fire, its corrupted armor fracturing.
And then a royal warden emerges from the shadowed alcoves of the tomb, leading a fresh, immaculate phalanx of Necron warriors.
In seconds, this new formation locks onto the chaotic mass and opens fire. They massacre practically half of the remaining cultist horde in a single volley.
Just a synchronized scythe of emerald Gauss energy, systematically stripping the flesh from hundreds of screaming fanatics.
The sheer attrition rate is staggering. Blood is pooling inches deep on the floor.
But Conrad remains entirely fixated on the prize. He guides the surviving chosen directly toward the center of the chamber, toward the Cetan shard.
When the Royal Warden's phalanx maneuvers to block their path, Conrad issues a simple, ruthless command over the Vox. He says, they must be eliminated.
Conrad's physical fury in this moment is palpable. He doesn't hold back and direct his troops. He physically charges directly into the absolute thickest part of the melee.
He wields a massive demon-forged sword known as the Blade of Liberation.
He is cleaving through Necron warriors, his blade biting through living metal. He engages the Royal Warden directly, crippling the ancient commander with a series of devastating strikes.
Simultaneously, the frenzied Hellbrute utilizes a power scourge, a multi-headed flail of crackling, corrupt energy to literally whip the Overlord's immortal guard into metallic ribbons.
They are brute forcing their way through a technological masterpiece of defense. It is sheer, bloody-minded willpower and warp-infused strength matched against calculating, unfeeling machine logic.
And despite the horrific casualties, they are gaining ground. They are pushing right to the foot of the central stasis vault.
The physical vault is open, the Vanguard guards are falling, Conrad is forcing his way up the dais toward the Star God.
The intense bloodshed, the massive discharge of warp energy from the demonic weapons, the sheer crushing concentration of destructive intent in that room, it acts as a catalyst.
The vault's true terror is about to awaken from its immaterial slumber.
This is the critical turning point of the conflict. The Cetan shard of the Void Dragon, resting in its pure immaterial energy state, registers the absolute existential danger approaching it.
The Necron containment protocols are failing. The physical barrier is breached. The Cetan reacts by initiating its own supreme defense protocols.
I want you to truly visualize this process. This entity, which has been existing as a pure floating essence of cosmic energy, begins to condense.
It draws the fundamental physical laws of the room into itself. Gravity warps, light bends.
It manifests a terrifying, towering physical form constructed of living metal and starlight. The Star God is materializing into real space.
And how does Conrad react to the materialization of a god? A sane commander would immediately order a tactical retreat.
Right, a cautious commander would establish a defensive perimeter and call for heavy orbital bombardment.
Conrad does neither. He immediately uses his internal Vox speed to call in his ultimate reserve force. He orders Chaos Lord Reinhardt and his elite Terminator squad to teleport directly into the chamber.
They tear through the fabric of reality itself. A localized warp rift tears open in the center of the room, accompanied by a deafening thunderclap of displaced air, and these massive, hulking Terminators materialize directly behind the materializing Star God.
Looking at this objectively, we have to ask, is this supreme tactical confidence on Conrad's part, or is this just the terminal madness of the warp taking hold?
I mean, you are ordering your most valuable, irreplaceable elites to teleport directly into the blast radius of a waking cosmic deity.
It is the apex of both, inextricably linked. From a purely tactical standpoint, if you are forced to strike a god, you strike it from behind with everything you have in the very microsecond before it fully orientates itself to the material plane.
You rely on the element of supreme shock.
But from a psychological standpoint, it requires a level of megalomania that can only be bred by centuries of survival in the Eye of Terror. Conrad genuinely believes that his righteous, warp-fueled fury can overpower a fundamental foundational force of the universe.
But the universe strikes back. Almost instantly. The Cetan, fully materialized, summons a voltaic storm.
Raw, unfiltered cosmic electricity cascades across the entire chamber, arching through the chaos lines.
Simultaneously, the Plasmancer flanks the Chaos Advance and unleashes a lightning storm of its own, completely vaporizing the remaining Chaos Chosen.
Conrad's elite honor guard is simply gone, turned to ash drifting on the thermals.
And this leads to the most tragic, profoundly ironic ghoul in the entire historical record of this conflict. Hawkmeister Conrad, the supreme architect of this invasion, engages the materialized Cetan in a furious one-on-one melee.
Looking at this duel, it really feels like a cosmic irony. Throughout the battle, Conrad's ancient, corrupted Terminator armor has been shrugging off Gauss fire because it's protected by an aura of warp energy.
He has a metaphysical shield against physical bullets.
But now he's fighting the Cetan, which isn't just shooting bullets, it's weaponizing the fabric of the materium itself.
Exactly. Conrad brings a spiritual shield to a fundamental physics fight. The Cetan is not merely a machine wielding a weapon.
It is the materialized fury of the cosmos. It doesn't need to pierce armor. It simply alters the reality of the space Conrad occupies.
The telemetry shows the Cetan wielding a weapon designated the Spear of the Void Dragon.
And despite Conrad's centuries of combat skill, despite the hateful power of his demonic blade, the sheer, overwhelming, reality-bending power of the Star God is too much.
The Cetan strikes. The Spear of the Void Dragon bypasses Conrad's warp protections entirely, dealing a grievous, impossibly deep wound.
The Hawkmeister, the visionary of this bloody pilgrimage, collapses into the dust of the alien tomb, his lifeblood spilling out over the metallic floor.
To see their supreme leader and prophet fall in such a manner would break the command structure of any normal military force. They would rout instantly.
But Lord Reinhardt and his newly arrived Terminators do not pause for a microsecond. They launch a desperate, horrifying melee assault directly onto the back of the Citan.
We need to analyze this assault deeply, because the information data mentions they are using accursed weapons, chain fists, and power fists.
Right.
We just established that the Citan has a body of living metal that can regenerate and that governs reality. How are mere physical weapons hurting a god?
This is where the metaphysical nature of this universe dictates the physics of the battlefield. The Citan is a creature of the materium. It is entirely bound to the physical laws of the universe, even if it can manipulate those laws to godlike, terrifying degrees.
It expects physical resistance, it expects heat, kinetic force, and radiation.
But the Terminators are not fighting with mere physical force. They are wielding weapons deeply steeped in the immaterium, the warp.
So they are striking the physical god with its fundamental ontological opposite.
Precisely. When a chained fist roaring with demonic energy and hateful sentience tears into the living metal of the star god, it isn't just causing physical trauma, it is inflicting ontological damage.
It is introducing a paradoxical, chaotic unreality directly into the god's physical form.
It is like trying to compute a divide by zero error on a universal scale. The Citan's living metal instinctively tries to regenerate, but the warp taint introduces a paradox that rots the necrodermis from the inside out.
The Terminators maintain an uninterrupted ferocity. Through sheer, hate-fueled application of unreality, they literally outdamage the living metal's ability to knit itself back together.
They deeply, severely wound the cosmic entity.
But the cost of this engagement, the slaughter continues unabated all around them. It's absolute screaming chaos in that chamber.
The Plasmancer turns its attention and casually vaporizes one of the Terminators into atomic mist.
The Royal Warden, who has fully regenerated from Conrad's earlier attack, surges forward to distract the squad.
This momentary distraction is all the wounded Citan needs. It lunges with blinding speed and impales another Terminator on its spear, lifting the massive warrior off the ground.
From the perimeter of the room, the surviving Chaos Heavy support the Hellbrute, having finally crushed the Necron Overlord to death, and the heavily damaged Obliterator turn all of their heavy weapons directly onto the dragon.
Multi-meltas, plasma blasts, and flesh metal cannons all pour relentless, blinding fire into the struggling, roaring deity.
But even severely damaged, leaking blinding cosmic energy from dozens of wounds, the Star God unleashes a whirlwind of absolute brutality.
It is a dying god, thrashing in the dark, and its death throes are apocalyptic. It executes the remaining Terminators one by one.
The physical power it displays is mind-numbing. It crushes ceramite like paper. It continues this rampage until finally the dust settles slightly and the violence pauses for a fraction of a second.
And we are left with the last man standing. Chaos Lord Reinhardt is the only Terminator left upright.
The strike force is utterly, entirely decimated. The thousands of cultists are dead. The Chosen are ash. The Terminators are slaughtered.
Conrad is bleeding out on the floor, his breasts shallow and wet.
By any standard military metric, looking at a spreadsheet of assets deployed versus assets surviving, this operation is a catastrophic, unmitigated failure. They have lost almost everything they brought to the planet.
But that is the crucial, horrifying revelation of this entire historical record. This massive, staggering loss of life was never a failure. It was an absolute mathematical requirement for the next phase of the operation.
So Reinhardt is left standing in the ashes of his brothers. But this wasn't a failure of command. The staggering loss of life wasn't an accident.
No, there's a thermodynamic requirement for what Reinhardt is about to pull out of his pack.
The battlefield is silent, save for the heavy, labored breathing of the few survivors and the crackle of dying energy shields. Conrad, mortally wounded, supported by the trembling hands of the last few surviving cultists, looks out across the chamber.
The telemetry notes a chilling detail here. Conrad looks down at the floor. The floor is entirely coated in blood.
Space Marine blood, cultist blood, the slick, oily, corrupted fluids of the demon engines.
It is a literal lake of gore that covers the ancient Necron architecture. And Conrad realizes the moment has come. He yells out to Reinhardt, his voice cutting through the ringing silence. "The monster is fatally wounded. It's time for it to be ours."
And this is the signal. Reinhardt reaches for the secret weapon they have carried into this tomb, a device known as the Blood Ether Cube.
We must delve deeply into the mechanics of this device, because this is where the madness of their ideology becomes terrifyingly practical.
The cube was designed by a figure within the order known as the Bloodsmith, Arch-Hospitaller Vorn.
Vorn is a twisted fusion of an apothecary's bioalchemy and a warpsmith's techno-heresy. He is a master of manipulating flesh, metal, and arcane energies.
The cube he designed is not a conventional stasis trap. It does not use gravity fields or energy shields.
It is a profane module sealed with immaterial energy.
It fundamentally weaponizes the warp against the Cetan.
Exactly. As we discussed regarding the accursed weapons, the warp is the ultimate anathema to the physical Cetan. The cube doesn't create a physical wall to hold the god.
It projects a localized, pure vacuum of reality.
It creates a pocket of the universe where physical laws simply cease to exist, replaced entirely by the howling, chaotic energy of the warp.
Let me propose an analogy for this. Think of the Cetan as a colossal, deep-sea creature built entirely to survive the crushing pressure and physical rules of the ocean depth, the physical universe.
Okay, right.
The Blood Aether Cube doesn't build a stronger physical cage to hold it. Instead, it acts like an inverted submarine airlock. It violently removes all the water, the reality around the Cetan, replacing it with the absolute vacuum of the warp.
The Cetan isn't just physically trapped, it's suffocating in unreality.
That analogy perfectly captures the ontological horror of the device. It projects a localized Geller field inversion.
A standard Geller field keeps the warp out of a ship. The cube keeps reality out of its containment zone.
But a device of that magnitude, something that literally rewrites the laws of physics in a localized area, doesn't just run on a standard plasma battery. It requires a massive catalyst.
I look at the telemetry of this battlefield, and I can't help but see a grim ritual circle.
The fighting, the dying, the seemingly terrible tactical decisions to throw bodies into the meat grinder, it was all a setup. The blood on the floor isn't just the tragic carnage of war, it's the oil.
It is the physical, metaphysical medium required to lubricate the transition between real space and the warp.
The Order of Mercy of Iron treats warfare as an occult science. The death of the thousands of cultists in the opening volley wasn't just to drain Necron ammunition.
It was to paint the floor with enough biological trauma and psychic suffering to physically thin the veil of reality in that specific subterranean room.
The blood acts as a metaphysical conductor, lowering the activation energy required to tear a hole in real space.
And now the device demands its final toll. The climax of this report is deeply grotesque. To initiate and sustain the cube's machinery, the device demands a toll of souls in real time.
The sensory logs describe the remaining cultists, the very ones who had been propping up the dying Conrad, suddenly taken by a grotesque, zealous fervor.
They don't flee. They gladly throw themselves onto their own blades.
They commit mass suicide on the spot, sacrificing their lives in a sudden explosion of fresh death to inflate the relic's power.
It is the ultimate, horrifying expression of their fanaticism. They die smiling, genuinely believing their blood is the final key to saving the Emperor's soul.
Reinhardt, standing colossal amidst the carnage, activates the cube just as the severely wounded, enraged Cetan lunges for him, preparing to tear him apart at the molecular level.
The device activates. The collision between the immaterial energy of the cube and the supreme material core of the deity sends out a deafening, reality-warping shockwave.
The dragon is momentarily stunned, paralyzed by the sudden influx of unreality.
But the cube needs one final, massive surge of energy to trigger its internal containment runes and pull the god inside. The mass suicide of the cultists wasn't enough to breach the final threshold.
It requires a massive, instantaneous concentration of death in a single microsecond to power the final inversion.
And Conrad, bleeding out, his life fading rapidly, issues the ultimate ruthless command. He looked at the last two heavy support elements of his strike force, the frenzied Hellbrute and the heavily damaged Obliterator.
Two ancient, incredibly powerful assets. Centuries of dark combat experience housed in walking fortresses of corrupted metal.
And in absolute, unquestioning obedience to Conrad's command, they turn their weapons directly on each other.
The Hellbrute and the Obliterator mutually annihilate, point-blank range. Multi-melta blasts and flesh metal cannons fired simultaneously directly into each other's reactor cores.
The resulting explosion of demonic energy, vaporized metal, and violent death is the final spark required. The massive kinetic and psychic release triggers the runes.
The physical space of the room abruptly inverts. The geometry of the moment is staggering. The small, profane box held by Reinhardt reverses its own dimensions.
It unfolds magically, expanding to impossible non-Euclidean proportions until its internal volume matches the immense size of the Cetan fragment.
Chains forged of pure, repugnant warp energy explode outward from its interior. They whip through the air, wrapping tightly around the struggling living metal of the star god.
The Cetan, a being of supreme material power, is caught in a net of pure unreality. It tries to exert its dominance over gravity and light, but those concepts do not exist within the chains binding it.
And despite a roar that the audio logs indicate would permanently deafen a mortal and freeze the soul of the most hardened warrior, the material Citan is violently, against its will, sucked into the chaos-bathed prison.
The impossible geometry of the cube folds back in on itself, crushing the god down into a portable dimension. The heavy red cast iron doors of the cube slam shut. The mystical seals burn solid with a final, hissing finality.
And then, well, absolute silence.
Complete silence falls over the alien tomb. The screaming metal, the roaring weapons, the cosmic storms, the thunderclaps of displaced air, all of it is gone.
The only sound echoing in the massive chamber is the morbid, continuous dripping of blood from the walls, the ceiling, and the fractured dais.
The immediate aftermath captured by the surviving sensors is a scene of profound, utter desolation.
The profane shockwave released by the blood ether cube snapping shut effectively pulverized any remaining Necrons in the immediate vicinity.
The Royal Warden, the Immortals, all turned to inert, lifeless dust, their reanimation protocols permanently severed by the warp blast.
In the center of this sea of metallic debris and blood, only 2 men survive. Chaos Lord Reinhardt, standing alone amidst the ashes of his Terminator brothers, holding a small iron box containing a god.
And Hawkmeister Konrad von Bassenheim. Konrad is barely alive, leaning heavily on the pommel of his cursed blade, his armor breached in a dozen places, his body irreparably ruined.
But the biological telemetry of his suit details his psychological state. Under his scarred mask, his mind is exulting.
Despite the agonizing physical pain, he is flooded with the adrenaline of ultimate conquest. He does not care that his chapter is practically annihilated.
Because we have to synthesize the horrifying reality of what has just occurred in this room. They didn't just defeat an enemy in a firefight, they subjugated a god.
They took a foundational fragment of the universe, a being that dictates the rules of reality and eats stars, and they stuffed it into a box.
And the grim, dark implication of this achievement cannot be overstated. The Void Dragon is no longer a cosmic threat in that sector. It is merely an arcane battery.
It is a limitless, enslaved power source that the Order will use to power the warp engines of their armada.
To power their bloody pilgrimage to Terra. They now possess the means to cross the galaxy, punch through any Imperial blockade with infinite energy, and attempt to assassinate the Emperor on the Golden Throne.
They paid for the engine of their crusade with oceans of blood, and they consider it a bargain.
And the tragic irony circles all the way back to the surface of the planet. We must briefly note the view from above. Faron Dumac.
Yes, Dumac is standing on the surface of Baldar, surveying the ruined human city of Picars. He is watching his mindless human slaves march into the mines, believing he is the absolute master of this domain.
He thinks he has awoken to a galaxy ripe for his harvest, easily conquering the Imperial Guard.
But then, he feels the tremors deep within his planet. The psychic and physical shockwave of the cube closing reverberates through the crust all the way to the surface.
And in that moment, the ancient, calculating intelligence of the Faron realizes, far too late, the terrible hubristic error he has made.
He wasn't harvesting insects on the surface. He left his front door open, and wolves tore through his basement and stole the very heart and soul of his entire world.
It is a staggering oversight by an immortal intelligence, blinded entirely by his own hubris. He believed the surface war was the true conflict, completely ignorant of the surgical strike happening beneath his feet.
And this brings us back to you, the listener. We warned you at the beginning of this broadcast about the sheer paranoia this report should induce.
It is easy to look out at the galaxy and fear the massive, visible threats. The alien armadas, the Tyranid hive fleets consuming whole sectors, or the awakened Necron dynasties marching in unison.
But this recovered data stream proves that the deepest, most unpredictable threats aren't just alien armies operating on conventional logic.
The deepest threats are the fanatical lengths that humanity's dark reflections will go to. The Order willingly destroyed their own forces, sacrificed thousands of their own followers, and fundamentally broke the laws of physics itself, all in the name of a twisted, paradoxical salvation.
They committed unimaginable atrocities, and they believe they're doing the right thing.
Which leaves us with a deeply unsettling question to consider as we close this file, a thought that undermines the security of every fortified vault in the Imperium.
Yes, if a fragment of a foundational star god, a being of unimaginable cosmic physical power, can be boxed and enslaved through sheer bloody sacrifice and fanatical willpower.
What does that mean for the supposed invulnerability of the highest powers in the galaxy?
If the Cetan can be chained by unreality and blood, what else is vulnerable? What other ancient, supposedly untouchable forces lie dormant in the darkness, simply waiting for someone willing to pay the necessary toll in blood to claim them?
A chilling thought to leave you with, and one that demands absolute vigilance. On behalf of Historiator Ophelia Perkemain and myself, we officially close this restricted data stream. We leave you in the solemn, echoing silence of the Logos Historica Verita. Stay vigilant.